Okay, perfect. Darcy is my moderator for this conversation. So if we see somebody enter late and needs that link again, she'll pop it in the chat. But otherwise, if you are on the Pear Deck, then you just need to be able to see the Pear Deck, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll come back to the chat. So while you have been waiting, you've been looking at a little word search, trying to find some words. So let's see, first of all, how everybody did. And on your screen on the right, hopefully you can see what some of the results were. If you click, can see it on the right there, I see that people said switch and stress and context and practice, quizzing, speech, space, spatial, novelty, all excellent responses. And all of those responses are things that are related to what we are going to do today. All of them have something to do with a brain-based teaching strategy. So just wanted to kind of get you started thinking about those different techniques. Okay. So this session is on brain-based teaching strategies. All of these strategies today, we're going to look at 9 different ones, come from cognitive psychology, have been highly researched. I won't get into a lot of the very specific brain terminology necessarily during this chat, but if you would like to know more about it, I have a couple books and a couple resources that I can recommend for sure. But otherwise, we're just going to talk about more of what they are and understand that they are all based in cognitive psychology. I'm Jackie Stevens. I teach in Mora. I am a 7th and 9th grade English teacher. I also have time in my day to be an instructional coach, and I'm our district staff development coordinator. So that's kind of my background. I got interested in cognitive psychology a few years ago, started following a lot of different resources, reading some more books, listening to some podcasts, and found the strategies I'm going to share with you today to be the ones that really had the easiest transition into the classroom, I guess you would say. Like, they're simple things you can do, either start to do or change what you're doing to make things a little bit better for your students who are learning in your classroom. I'm going to share 3 study strategies to start with, and those study strategies can either be ones that you incorporate into your lessons for students to practice, or study strategies that you teach your students so they know what they are doing. And then after that, we will look at 6 different important practices that impact memory and learning. Okay, so here's the first of our 9 strategies. This is retrieval practice, which simply means bringing information to mind. So you're retrieving the information from somewhere else in your head. And this little infographic here is, oh, we have a bell. Normally 6th hour would be starting right now. It's from learningscientist.org. They have a ton of information. These are written from the student's perspective. So like it says, you would put away your materials, write or sketch as much as you can think of about the topic to help you review it. It's a lot about pulling the information out of your brain without necessarily rereading it out of a textbook, is trying to remember without looking at it. How to do it is to take as many practice tests as you can, because you're trying to see that you can get the information right without looking at the information necessarily. You and a friend could trade. As a teacher, of course, you can come up with different ways to do that. Having students do Quizlet, for example, is helping them bring information to mind. Low stakes or no stakes quizzes, so that they come to class and you present them with a pop quiz that is not graded, is not going to hurt their grade in in any significant way, but it helps them try to retrieve from their memory where the information that they already have in there. You could make flashcards and just make sure that they're actually pulling the information from their brain before flipping them over. That can be one of the important strategies. So some of the things that the retrieval practice studies have shown is that question types themselves do not greatly affect the impact of retrieval practice. So you might think that multiple choice questions are not as great for assessing knowledge, and I think we do think that a lot of times, but when it comes to retrieval practice, it doesn't actually matter as long as they're having to try to remember the information without looking. And it is also resilient to distractions, meaning that they studied it, and when students had practiced retrieval practice to study information, that then even when there were distractions in the classroom, it did not impact their ability to remember what they had studied. So the practice itself of, like I said, bringing the information to mind, not looking at the textbook over and over again, or looking at materials, or looking at teacher presentations, but trying your hardest to remember it by yourself, even if you get it wrong. So if you try to remember it and you can't, you get it wrong, the practice that your brain does of trying to remember is enough to help you remember it better the next time. So in the box that you should have on your screen if you're following along in the Pear Deck, list one strategy, practice, tool, or routine that could help students use retrieval practice, either in your setting or in another setting that you are aware of. And we'll wait for 1 minute to see if you can get some ideas down or one idea down. 30 seconds left to get an idea in there. Some really good ones. I'll mention them just when we're done here. Okay, minute is up. So some of the responses that people put were GimKit, having them write their own two-step equation and then solve it. Excellent. Putting a picture of a physical place and information in different areas of it, walking through it to retrieve info as they go. A lesson warm-up, a 30-second think, pair, share. Warm-up questions, Kahoot. Student generating questions for their peers to answer, entrance tickets or warm-ups, rewording the question into a statement with the answer to help them retrieve that information. All really great ideas that we can help our students study in our own classes or teach them how to study on their own as well. Okay, the next strategy is spaced practice. And spaced practice is when you space out the practice over time. So setting aside time so that you're not just, spaced practice is essentially the opposite of cramming, that you never want to cram before something. And even though you think that has worked for you in the past, possibly when you were in college, it actually doesn't work well for long-term memory, whereas setting aside time and spacing out practice over time is a much better way to study. One idea is to review information from each class after school. Again, this would be a student strategy, or if you teach an advisory or a study hall or something like that, but don't have them look at it immediately after class. So they have the lesson, and then they have some sort of break, and then they review the information after that. But that's something you could even do in your classes as well, where you teach, you have them take a little mental break and then review a little bit later. You review it a little bit the next day. You review a little bit the day after that. Instead of, I taught my content for day 1 of this unit, and then the next time we'll really look at it is on the review guide before the unit test. You would want to bring that day 1 material up several times throughout the unit. And even going back as far as a month ago, if you want to have students continue to remember what you taught them from the first unit of the year all the way to the end of the year, you need to continue to space out that practice over time for them. What has been really interesting from some of the research is that space practice is effective both for factual information and application questions. So it doesn't matter if you're just working on getting them to remember facts, or if you want them to try to remember more specific lab practices or the results of a lab or things like that. It works for both. Now, I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So this transition did not work well, so this just looks like a hot mess on your screen, but I apologize. But you get the idea without it. So let's just look at the front, or the one on the front there. So these are retrieval practice challenge grids, because space practice is kind of a form of retrieval practice. And so what these teachers have all done is they make a grid, and if it was from the very last lesson that you did, it's in the green and it's worth 1 point. The questions that they answer in yellow are from the week before a break or 2 weeks ago or something like that, and they're worth a couple more points. And then if it's even further back than that, like a month ago or 2 months ago, then it's worth more points. So continuously kind of getting students to review information that they just did, that they did a little while ago, and that they did a long while ago, and just a way to help incorporate that into your practice. They're called retrieval grids. So if you are interested in seeing examples of them, if you just Google retrieval grids, you will find lots of examples of them. All right, our third and final study strategy is interleaving, which is switching. Some of you found the word switch or switching in the word search at the beginning. Switching between ideas while you are studying. And the idea is not to study one idea for too long. So you would spend a little bit of time on topic A, then switch to topic B, then switch to topic C. This feels very unnatural. And it actually, a lot of the research says that students feel much more uncomfortable when they are studying with interleaving, and they feel like they're not understanding the material as well as somebody that is chunking it. But actually they're learning it much better. So in this graphic, you can see, like, the first time you study, you would study topic A first, then topic B first, then topic B, then topic C. The next time you would study, you'd switch the order up. The time after that, you'd switch the order up again. And so just continuously helping your brain switch between the different ideas. Like I said, it will feel a lot harder, but it's actually really helpful. And getting students to understand that can be a little bit tricky. Oh, sorry. One of the things for interleaving that you could do is, if you have a traditional worksheet that you've used in the past to help students review. Give them a pair of dice and say, you're going to roll the die to see which question you're going to answer first, and kind of help them move through the study guide in a more randomized order, or just rearrange the questions that you have in a current study. If you use a Kahoot to review, instead of having all the multiplication questions and then all the division questions and then all the word problems chunked in order, mix up the order. And I think a lot of times we think it's easier and better for students if they do them sort of chunked out. It's very organizational for us to think about. It's organizational for them to see, but it actually is more helpful to their learning if the ideas are switched up. Okay, so question for you on the screen. Which of those 3 study strategies, retrieval practice, space practice, or interleaving, do you think would be easiest to incorporate into your practice? Just go ahead and answer on the Pear Deck. Which is easiest to incorporate into your practice? Take another 10 seconds to answer that question. All right, and it looks like retrieval practice is the winner. The most people thought retrieval practice would be the easiest, and then there was quite a bit of space between interleaving and space practice. So then on the flip side of that, which of these study strategies would you like to make a goal to use more in your practice? Maybe you said retrieval practice would be the easiest and that's what you want your goal to be. Or maybe if you said interleaving or space practice would be more difficult, then that is what you would want your goal to be. But which one would you make a goal to incorporate more into your practice? Give another couple of seconds. Almost a tie. One more person said spaced practice than interleaving, but both of those, which makes sense. Like, we know retrieval practice is a little bit easier to incorporate into our practice, so we maybe are already doing it more, whereas spaced practice and interleaving is not quite as easy, so that would make a good goal to have. All right. Now we are going to move on to some strategies that just are little changes you could make a lot of times into your teaching, but that really help boost learning and memory. And the first one has to do with text and speech. So it is impossible to simultaneously read words while listening to someone speak. Your brain cannot do it. You might think that it can, but really what's happening is your brain is switching really quickly back and forth between the words that the person is saying and the words that you are reading. And so when you put a bunch of text on a slide, that makes it really difficult because the students are trying to read it and you are trying to explain it, and they have 2 forms of verbal words going in their head at one time. Basically, the way the brain works is that silent reading isn't really silent. When we are reading to ourselves, there's a voice going on in our head, and it won't take in our internal reading voice with the external voice of the teacher that's coming in. It can only understand one stream of verbal information at a time. So jumping between reading text and listening to speech impairs memory for both of those. So I know this is a problem that I have. I like to put information on slides or on handouts, and then I like to start talking about it as soon as it's up on the screen. Some things to keep in mind is to avoid a lot of text on slides. Put some keywords on there. The suggestion is fewer than 7, but to just avoid a lot of texts. Same thing, avoid or limit text on handouts, or distribute the handouts after you have said what you need to say. So you don't have people reading at the same time as you're speaking, which I realize is exactly what's happening right now, but just go with it. But it helps a lot. Or if you put information up on a slide, or in a handout, give students time to read it before you begin your extra explanation. So pause, wait for them to read the information themselves, and then begin speaking, because otherwise they're missing either part of what's on the handout or the slide, or part of what you are saying. And we don't want that, because everything that you say is important. All right. The next one strategy has to do with images and speech. So unlike text and speech that kind of don't go well together, images and speech go very well together. So listening to speech while looking at images can improve learning and memory. Hearing and vision combine to guide your interpretation and comprehension. It has another term as well. It's called dual coding, so that you're seeing or hearing the words, and then you're putting those words together with images, and it's creating a more solidified meaning. Now, this image is pretty simplistic with a dog and the word dog, but anytime you have a visual representation of a concept, if you match the explanation of that concept with an image of that concept, students are going to be able to make better meaning out of that for sure. So applications, use predominantly images on slides. Try for one image at a time so that you don't have, some people really loves to put all kinds of images all over the place and make it crazy, but that's not great for trying to make meaning in your brain. Relevant images support learning. So if the image that you have up there is really relevant to what you're explaining, fantastic, it's supporting learning. Irrelevant images, like maybe it's a comical image or something surprising, that supports engagement. So it'll be surprising and a little bit novelty, and it'll make your students perk up and pay attention again. So both types of images are actually okay, depending upon what you want the effect to be. Are you looking to sort of pop their engagement, or are you looking to support their learning? Okay, spatial layout is the next one, number 3 of our memory and learning strategies. So this is really interesting. Predictable spatial layout. So like if you have the image on one side of a slide and the text on the others, and that's the layout you use throughout a presentation, or on a handout, you use similar fonts and styles, and students always know where to find the directions. They always know where to find the headings. Those predictable spatial layouts actually frees up mental resources in somebody's brain, and it supports their learning and memory. So a spatial layout can be used as a guiding cue to help students recall information. So they know where to find the keywords. They know where to find the topic. They know where to find the extra information. And so having a consistent layout actually frees up their brain space to learn more of what it is you're teaching. So a really simple thing to do is having consistent layout. It actually saves you time because you don't have to come up with something new every time. So ensure slides or handouts are consistently formatted. If you need, again, that quick little engagement, you might have a random slide that doesn't follow the rules. Maybe it's another one of those attention-grabbing images, but it breaks the consistency and it forces their attention to come back. So if you feel like there might be a part of your lesson where kids are getting, it's partway through your lesson, you need to shake things up a bit, you can break the consistency. But otherwise, a consistent spatial layout will give your students more room in their brain for what you are teaching them, which is fantastic. All right, so we've gone over 3 of them. We went over text and speech, we went over images and speech, and then spatial layout. So a quick question on your Pear Deck screen there is, which of those strategies do you think you do the best right now? Do you have consistent spatial layout? Do you pair your images with words? Or do you avoid having a lot of text on handouts and then talking while they are, and avoid talking while they're looking at that? Oh, clear cut winner here. Most people said maintaining consistent formatting is one of the things you do the best right now. And congratulations. Like I said, a lot of times that's just out of ease, but good for you because you're actually boosting your students' ability to learn more information from you. So that's fantastic. And of course, then we have to look at the other side. Which of those strategies might be an area of growth for you? Avoiding a lot of text on handouts or slides, or trying not to talk while students are trying to read the handout or slides, putting the images and the speech together, or having that more consistent layout. All right, most people said limiting the amount of text on screen or avoiding talking with students. There were a few people that said the other ones as well. That's fine, but just something to think about as we are preparing for going back to school time. How can you make sure that you are making those small changes? Okay, 3 strategies left. And the first one is context. So now you see on this slide, we have the desks demonstrating the classroom setting, and then the bedroom. As we know, we are entering a period of time where there is very likely to be times that students are learning things at home, and then other times they're learning things at school. If we are in a hybrid model, things like that, we are prepared for any of those challenges. Well, actually, where people practice and learn and how they feel when they practice actually form an integral aspect of what they learn. The external environment around us enters into all new memories, and our internal environment of what we're feeling enters all of our memories. So a couple of things to do with that, like our performance improves in new environments if we have practiced in multiple environments. So if we are having students study at home, but then we move into a distance learning format or hybrid learning format, and that's where they end up taking the assessment, unless they've had some time to practice that content at home, they're probably not going to do as well because the classroom atmosphere actually entered into their memory when they were learning that new content. Same thing, and we don't do this anymore at Mora in the high school. I don't know about at the elementary, and I'm not sure about other schools, but we used to always take the MCAs in the computer lab, but they learned the information in our classrooms. And so really what we should have done and never did was taken students to the computer lab to practice learning some of the information, to practice reviewing some of that information so that they would be better prepared in a different setting, or taking them outside to practice one day, taking them on a walk and talk around the hall to practice one day. So they got used to retrieving that information in a variety of different settings so that no matter where they end up taking the test, they can handle it. They're ready to retrieve that information from a new location. Similarly, like I said, the internal feelings that they have. So if they were feeling really happy, that day, then they are going to do better if they're feeling really happy again. All of the senses around them. So that's something where if you chew peppermint gum while you are learning something, you will be able to remember it again better if you are chewing peppermint gum, because the peppermint gum entered your senses when you were making that new memory. So it's kind of interesting about context in that recreating the same context will help them boost memory. But if you want your students to be able to understand that skill or perform that task in any setting, then you need to provide them opportunities to practice in a variety of settings. So, like it says, the applications here, mix up the training context. Typically, it would take 3 exposures, so not just 3 times in the classroom, but maybe you're moving them around the classroom, or like I said, a walk and talk around the hallway. With COVID concerns, maybe you're taking the class outside when you can, but practicing the same information in a variety of places, and then leveraging the senses to reinstate memory. Maybe you play a certain kind of music in the background as students are studying something for the first time, and then you play that certain kind of music again as they are studying right before a test, or even taking a quiz or an assessment of some kind. So context always enters into new memories, and so you can really play with that a lot with your students. Lighting is also one of the effects. Yeah, same thing as far as the senses. So if you have mood lighting or lamp lighting or things like that, or it might even be something like it might be a little more difficult if they only learned it when it was really bright somewhere, and then it's dreary and there's not a lot of light on. It might be more difficult for them to recall those things. Okay, so here we have a little Goldilocks. And we all know the story of Goldilocks, and she sat in the first chair and it was too hard, and then she sat in the second chair and it was too soft, and then she sat in the third chair and it was just right. That's the same way stress works. So moderate stress actually can boost memories and general learning. And I know there's a lot, like when I say stress, I don't mean like we want to freak them out a little bit, not that kind of stress, but not to the point that they're feeling apathetic, that they're feeling bored, that they're feeling like distracted by other things because their attention isn't on what they are focusing or what you want them to focus on. So high stress and no stress can both be detrimental to their learning. So during this, we're going to get a little scientific here. During moderate stress, ARC proteins support neurons in the hippocampus, which boosts memory, and FGF2 grows new neurons, which boosts learning. So it helps both memory and learning when they have that moderate stress level. So I know we are a lot, as we should be, very concerned about social and emotional learning, and we definitely want to create that safe space for students. However, I'm not suggesting that you try to stress them out. It's more about that mental, like not everything's going to be too easy for them. They're going to have to work a little bit, and that actually, the challenge helps get them into an optimal point of stress. So mixing up activities to maintain moderate stress. Novelty is actually one of the best tools to maintain brain health and flexibility, is mixing things up. But like I said, of course, you always need to make sure that your classroom, your environment is psychologically safe. We're not talking about that kind of stress when we say that a little stress is a good thing. We always want to make sure that we're being really safe with everything. Okay, so those were 8 of the strategies. So now we are on to the final number 9. And our number 9 strategy is stories. So using stories to guide understanding and memory formation and thinking is really helpful. Stories make ideal memory landmarks in our head for 3 reasons. First of all, they mimic how the brain naturally thinks. We naturally think and cause and effect. That's just the way the brain works. So a story mimics that trend. First this happened, which caused this, which caused this. They also allow for mental and emotional stimulation. So you're intaking more information, but you are also getting a little bit of an emotional response because you're connecting to a character or wanting to find out what happens, or some sort of emotional response that way. And stories release oxytocin and they drive a bond between the storyteller and the listener. So if you know somebody that tells really good stories, you like being around them. So if you have that bond with your students because you share information with them through stories. I remember a teacher a few years ago that was here, and students loved taking his class because they said he always told the best stories. So they built that bond with him and were more eager to learn the material as well. So simply being a storyteller related to your content is a great way to help students build memory. So obviously some applications you can open with this story. It's a great way to sort of hook students into the lesson, and it helps them build that relevance. Ask others to share their own stories that are relevant to the content. Of course, I add that because we've all had students that can share lots of stories that really don't connect. And this last one is kind of important. Match your story to your audience. So if you know that your audience already has a lot of background information about something, they already know a certain story, like when we went to the Goldilocks slide, I didn't tell you the whole story of Goldilocks because I'm guessing everybody's familiar with it. And if I had shared the entire story of Goldilocks, some of you would have tuned out. You would have felt like I was talking down to you, like I thought, how dare you not know the story of Goldilocks? And it would be redundant information in my audience's head that you already know it. You're not getting anything new by me telling you that story again. So be aware of the stories you select and understand if your audience would already be very familiar with it or if it's a new take on something. Okay. So just want to review quickly the different strategies we talked about today. Retrieval practice is bringing to mind any of the information that you have without looking necessarily. Space practice, spacing your practice out over time so that you're going back to what you learned the day before, the week before, the month before, the semester before. Interleaving, you're constantly switching up what you're studying. Text and speech, making sure that you're not talking over while someone is reading something. Pairing images and speech together to create that dual coding, that extra meaning there. Having a consistent spatial layout to ensure that you're freeing up some memory for students to take in more of what you're teaching. Understanding how context enters into all new memory. So recreating context at times, whether it's the different senses, light, smell, sound, whatever it might be, recreating to boost memory or switching up context so that students can remember the information in multiple contexts. Achieving that optimal level of stress, just a little by adding some novelty, not letting them get too bored because then they're not stressed at all, and that's not a great place for learning to happen. And then using stories. So I'm going to end this Pear Deck presentation. And once you get back to the chat of the Google Meet, we have about 5 minutes left. If you could just share either a strategy that you have used for any of these that has worked really well for you in the chat, or if you could share one that, oh, I didn't really know that, I could definitely work on adding that. I have an idea of how I might add it, or I just need to think about it more and add it. So either something you've done before or something you might consider doing in the future for any of these 9 strategies. Like I said, I'm going to end this presentation and then go back over to the chat to see what you have said. Okay. Ooh, we have lots of good comments here. Carmen says she's used stories for years. That's fantastic. The retrieval challenge, like that grid, super fun. Changing up locations. I know, especially with this upcoming year where you know that there maybe going to have to be changing sessions a lot anyway. Ooh, social skills stories. Awesome. Ooh, I like the idea of using stories in a high school math class. For sure, you could make some really interesting ways to help them understand how that works. About text and speech, should students listen to music with words while they read? So the research on music is that if the words are loud enough that they are pulling, so that they're listening to the words as opposed to listening to the voice in their head while they read, then their attention is always going to be split and they're not going to be able to understand what they're reading as much. If it's soft enough so that it's not really pulling that attention, or, you know, if it's words that they can't really understand, so it's not pulling their attention, but it's enough, if it's enough that it's like clearly pronounced or loud enough or something like that, that those words are pulling their attention away, then they're constantly their brain's going to be switching back and forth between reading, music, reading, music, reading, music, which would obviously pull a little bit. Lots of people have used stories. That's fantastic. Oh, yeah, I like that. That you've used stories before, Christopher, but that you should organize when to use them. Absolutely. The retrieval challenge. Oh, Carmen shared a video with us. That's fantastic. Oh, some good music stuff. Awesome. Thank you. So if anybody has any other questions, I will hang. Oh, Nick said, well, using Quizlet to make study cards. You have students add images of the nation's outline. That's a great idea. On Quizlet, it took me a while to figure out that you could like add the images to Quizlet flashcards, and that's like a game changer. I love that. That's fantastic. Tracy's question. About text and music, yeah. Just trying to make sure that they can't hear all of the words or that that's going to pull attention. And sometimes music is really preference. So there's actually been a lot of other studies done with noise in the classroom. And what they've said is different people have different optimal levels of noise for their learning, which is not really helpful to a classroom because everybody has a different setting of like background noise that they like to have. And there is such a thing as different people having an optimal level of background noise, and some legitimately like noise in the background to help them study or to help them read or learn or whatever, while others have a very low threshold for what they